right. We're going to give it a couple seconds here. We have the rest of our attendees that are filing in from the waiting room. I'm watching the countdown here at the bottom. But we do want to get started here in a second. We have a very important topic and want to make sure that we leave enough time for our esteemed presenters, as well as some time at the end to be able to engage in dialogue with all of you that are joining us here today and to be able to answer some questions too. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So I want to thank you for joining us today. My name is Jonathan Eisler. I'm the Vice President of Organizational Consulting and Business Development at Perspectives. Recently, our series on virtual workshops that we've been doing that was initially around COVID has pivoted to address racism because we recognize that the protests, the calls for justice and reform, violence and more really impact employees and therefore our workforces of today. Leaders and managers alike are searching for answers. That's why we wanted to bring you insight from your peers and your resources. Well, we also want to provide a forum for questions and answers, hence the dialogue piece at the end that I mentioned a minute ago. During today's session, we're presenting 3 of our esteemed account managers. These prospective team members oversee the employee assistance programs for around 120 organizations collectively, and they work hand in hand with the human resources department at all of our customer organizations. They also provide in-person and virtual, more so virtual as of late, training seminars on a number of topics, some of which are on the very topic we're discussing today. Stephanie Haywood has a master's degree in counseling, and she's a licensed clinical professional counselor. And she has, I believe, a little more than 20 years experience working in the employee assistance or the EAP field. We're also joined by Sinette Thompson. She has a little over a decade of experience in business development and human relations. Sinette brings a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology from my alma mater, the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. And we also are joined by Kelly Calderon. She's been in a number of different roles here at Perspectives, including working in our Access Center, taking calls and supporting employees at our customer organizations, also being a counselor, and then now she is one of our account managers as well. And she has a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. So at the end of the presentation today, we're going to open things up for some Q&A. Now, a little different than we've done in the past, just based off of the volume of attendees that are joining us here today, we would ask that you put questions, specific questions, down in the little Q&A thing at the bottom of your screen there. But at the same time, we want to enable all of us to engage in dialogue around the discussion. So comments that you would like to leave or pose to the group, let's say, use the chat feature, because then this will enable us to really focus on the questions that are coming in. And then I'll be able to help field these back to our esteemed panelists at the end. In case we don't get to all questions, stay tuned, because within about 2 to 3 days of today's session, we'll be sending around a recording that will include information and contact information that you can reach out if you have more additional questions too. And like I said, you will get the full recording here. So if you're not able to take all the notes or take all the screenshots to be able to catch the slides, don't worry, that will be coming before the week's over. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and welcome everybody again. So today I have an agenda here, but what we're really going to do is to provide this PowerPoint presentation as a panel discussion with myself and my colleagues, as Jonathan mentioned. But our goal is to really define racism, learn how to be an ally, understanding the distinction between diversity and inclusion, and then providing you with some resources. And what we really want to accomplish is really to facilitate an honest discussion. And so that discussion will not only provide an understanding of our varied experiences, but also to learn ways of becoming an advocate of anti-racist behaviors. So even as I go into this first slide, I want to start and ask a question out to Kelly. As a white female who I work with, I just want to know, what was your feeling when I first asked you to join or be a part of this panel discussion?
Yeah, so if I'm being very honest, which I will be, I was pretty nervous when you first asked, just thinking to myself, you know, what kind of value can I bring, and just trying to figure out, you know, how I can help with such an important topic. You know, it probably would have been easy for me to just say, no, I'm good, but that's not what I wanted to do. You know, I've been really trying to make sure I'm checking myself and trying to help educate others and as well as myself. So by saying yes, as much as it might have felt a little uncomfortable in the beginning, I really am so glad that I did it because it helped me to help, you know, work with you guys too as my colleagues and hopefully help other organizations move towards growth. So yeah, it was a little uncomfortable, but that's kind of why we're here and that's what we're talking about. So, you know, I was really honored to be a part of this.
Good, good, awesome. So as we're talking about, I have here, hopefully you've had a chance to read through my racism in the workplace slide here. Really, I'm giving a bit broad definition that you could find in a dictionary and then narrowing it down to talk about systemic racism and specifically in the workplace, as we're dealing with the workplaces right now. And I think we all know in general that racism is an issue. No one actually condones it or the behaviors associated with it. But as we look at all the environments in which we work or even live, we can see that systemic racism is ingrained in the mindset, and that keeps Black and Brown people from advancing in the same way as white people. So I want to give you just a quote. It says, Angela Davis is a famous civil rights activist, and she said, it's not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. And the distinction goes from merely talking about how bad it is and how you don't agree with it to then taking action against it and working toward eradicating it. You know, so how do we begin to do that? Like, what does it mean to be an ally? And you can see in this box, it says being an ally means actively using your privilege to actively combat the effects of racism, you know, actually confronting it. And before I pose another question to Kelly or Sinette, you know, I just want to give you an example of a post that my own sister posted on social media just about 2 weeks after the murder of George Floyd. And it says, my morning coffee takeout Saturday at my favorite barista, not Starbucks, is accompanied by a white man across the street who's screaming on a corner a series of statements professing hate against N-word people. A white woman waiting for her coffee asked me, are you okay? I'm so sorry. And she calls the police. As this young man approaches, my coffee's ready, thank God. And she walks me to my car explaining, I'm going to wait for the police. And I say, thank you. Now, she's not a police officer, but she protected and served. If anyone's wondering what an ally looks like, this is it. So let me pose a question to you, Kelly, again. In what ways have you experienced or seen others be an ally?
Yeah, so being an ally, I think, is really just trying to figure out how to educate yourself and listen. And it's an active process too. It's an ongoing process. So it's not something that you just, you know, do and then it's over and that's it. So I've been really personally trying to learn more and just listen. And like the quote says, you know, using your privilege, recognizing my own privileges and where that is, and trying to educate others as well. If I hear a comment or something and I feel like it's probably on either on the border or it is a racist comment, actually sticking up and saying something like you said in your story, Stephanie. I think it's just really important to use that and to just figure out how you can help. You know, in any situation, there's a point where we can all do something. So to me, that's being an ally. And also, you know, just seeing people, so many of my friends and family and so many people posting on social media about, you know, raising awareness for anti-racism, you know, supporting Black-owned businesses, things like that. Anything like that, I feel like is being an ally.
That's good. That makes me think about empathy. When you start saying, you know, a lot of what you're talking about that you're reaching out to makes me think of empathizing with other people. And I want to bring Sinette into the conversation here and just ask you, Sinette, you know, did anyone check on you and, you know, after all of this happened, or ask you as a Black woman, you know, how are you doing and what was your response, and anything else you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had quite a few people reach out to me, send me emails, texts, and calls. I have to be honest, majority of my reach outs came from my colleagues, my professional friends. And what I noticed across the board, and this is in hindsight, what I noticed across all of the conversations that I had and all the emails, for everyone who reached out to me specifically stated in some part of the conversation, I don't know what it's like to be a Black person. I don't know what it's like to be a Black woman. I don't know what it's like to be a Black man. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take responsibility for my privilege. I'm going to take responsibility for what I don't know, and I'm going to use that now. And I thought that was really powerful because it takes, what I noticed in that experience was that it takes someone to acknowledge that they're aware of it not being their situation, but they're choosing to put themselves in that situation. And to your point, Stephanie, that's where empathy is birthed. It's birthed from a place of taking responsibility for not knowing or not having or being in a particular situation and choosing in that space to be that. So for example, when I think about that, when I think about this empathy and all the times that I've exercised it and was conscious of doing so, I had to stop and acknowledge that I was not that person. I hadn't had that experience, but I wanted to experience that with them. And it was through me experiencing that with them that I was able to move through that space and even offer myself in a different capacity. So when I think of empathy, for example, for those of you all who are under the sound of my voice, who are not innately an empathetic person, this is the time to really stop and take ownership of where you don't have that experience and try to place yourself there. So like, for example, for those of us who may have brothers, right, or sons, husbands, who imagine every time that they walk out of their house in the morning, you gave them a kiss to go to school or to go to work. Imagine them not coming home. And if they came home, or every time they left the house, their lives were threatened every single time. Or imagine being so concerned of them being able to come back home, possibly because their lives weren't valued, you know? And so it takes examples like that to stop and say, hey, how would I feel if my husband walked out the door and I wouldn't see him, and every time he walked out the door, he was looked as a threat, or my son, right? So to your question, yeah, I had amazing support during this time. And I think that a part of that made me feel even more valuable and validated in this space was having my colleagues and my friends take ownership of their privilege in the space that they were in, and was choosing to share that space with me.
That's so good. It sounds like you're saying that people took the time to begin to look inside themselves and challenge themselves, or that's what you're asking for or challenging people to do, is to look within and to start to introspect about, you know, how can I be helpful? What can I say? How can I relate or empathize, like you're saying? And, you know, even as this slide is talking about, we have, our Black boys and men are killed by the police 3 times as much as white boys or men. And so it is important, I think, that we begin to look in to do a better job of that because of the racism. And I do have an example too. In one of the accounts that I deal with, I've had a person who was answering the phone, and this is a white female who was answering the phones, and she got a call, and the other person on the other end was another white person, but she kept referring to those people. And she kept saying those people, you know, those people doing all those rioting, you know how they are. And, you know, this other person who works for the organization who had answered the phone said, you know, what do you mean those people? So she was challenging and asking, you know, why are you referring to a group as those people? And so I think standing up like that is one of the examples. Wouldn't you agree, Sinette?
Absolutely. Using your voice and saying, how can I hold not only myself accountable in this process, but hold those around me accountable, because it's the lack of not taking a stand and choosing in that space to say, hey, well, what do you mean by that? You know, let's have a conversation. Or it also highlights maybe what someone else has been maybe just completely disconnected from for a long time. So once we challenge others, we then not only hold ourselves accountable, but we hold other people accountable as well, which goes back into the ally aspect. We're in it together.
Yeah, that's good. Kelly, did you have a comment too?
Yeah, and I mean, going over this slide, racism is an endemic. I mean, that's basically saying, that's the norm, which is, something that we need to combat, because I think in that situation, Stephanie, that person too, I mean, it sounds like he might not have even known that he was saying anything offensive or wrong. And so by that other person confronting him, the hope is that, he takes a step back and says, oh, I probably shouldn't say that. And that's not something that is okay to say. So again, like confronting somebody, it's helping you stand up for something that's right, as well as hopefully opening that other person's eyes to know what is not right.
Excellent. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that is how we start to create people starting to become more introspective. So good point there too. So this next slide is really about different ways, tips that we're giving you on how to participate. Some people don't want to protest. They don't feel comfortable or confident protesting. So here's some things that you can do to still be supportive, that each person can do their part. And Sanette, what other ways can people do their part in being supportive?
Yeah, I had an experience with a friend a couple of weeks ago where this is a new experience for myself and a lot of us in the Black community, and new experience in that the experience of the Black person is not new, but the experience of being able to openly have conversations and hear others take responsibility for where they stand and where we are now. But in that space, there has been a somewhat of an expectation for those of us who are in this space to say something and do something, right? And so sometimes, and this is what I'm hearing also with some of my peers, it's like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I want to, march, but I don't want to be out there with all those people. I want to stand up, but I don't want to push the envelope or whatever the case may be. But I had a friend on last week, she was the one who stood in that space of being like, I want to do something, but I don't know what to do. And she shared with me that she works for a company, and this company, she's one of the vendors that she's been using for years. He's a white man. And there was a conversation that was had in the organization during his time of dropping off some products, and he was saying basically that he felt that all of the murders and a lot of the experiences that has happened throughout the Black community, it was just like, I mean, it is what it is basically. And so obviously, there was a lot of emotion around that, and for my friend, and she. She's not a confrontational person. She's not one to really stand up and say, hey, what do you mean by that? But what she did was she used her voice by no longer purchasing and patronizing his organization, his company, because it was through her business that she purchased and supported his business and his family for years. And it was in that experience that she recognized that the value that he had on our lives, there wasn't any. And so she used her voice and her activism by no longer supporting him. So that's an example of, for those who want to do something, it doesn't have to look like, you standing outside, or it doesn't look like you having to stand up, and we all have our way of dealing with it, but there's something you can do. And again, that's an example of how we can always use our power to make a statement and make a difference.
And that's a good example of impacting the bottom line, which is then touching people, where it could really be hurtful in some ways if they continue to operate with those, biases. And I wanted to touch on this list with creating employee resource groups quickly, because I do know of an organization that actually put together a team of employees who were like-minded and really wanted to make a difference, and they actually pooled their money together for one of their coworkers who was a single mom and didn't have enough money to provide Christmas gifts. And so they all pooled their money together as a resource group and made sure that she could provide for her kids during Christmas time. And that's just an example of how people, on the level of employee level, got together and tried to do something to also make a difference and to help other people. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. So I wanted to touch on this diversity versus inclusion, because what we have found often is that diversity provides the potential for greater innovation and creativity. I think we all know that if the company or the organization or the group is diverse, you have an opportunity for more and different kinds of ideas. But inclusion is what enables the organizations or group to realize the business benefits of this potential, because we're actually including all of who they are into the diverse population. So diversity and inclusion are two halves of a whole. And I think we need both in order for us to be successful. And Kelly, I want to ask you, how do you see those two as necessary to come together?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think you have to have both, because you can have a diverse, group of people, but if you're not inclusive of everyone, you're going to create this separation that might not even be something that you're intending to do, but it automatically creates that separation. So on one hand, you have this diverse workforce, but there's people that may be in minority groups that, are part of your organization that feel excluded. And so that just keeps, it'll keep happening. And as more people come on, that separation grows. So it's really important to have the diversity part as well as being inclusive of everyone. I think that's very, very vital.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about, as we go into the next slide, the impact that can have on people when they are part of an organization and they bring diversity, but they may not necessarily feel included. But I do want to give an example of this. At one of my workplaces on Juneteenth, they did a moment of silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And as we know, that relates to how long the knee was on the neck of George Floyd. And they stopped and did that, which then demonstrated including, because the organization at the very top tier has white people, but there's so much diversity. But we could have diversity and call ourselves diverse, but it's not until those people felt included and felt like this organization cares enough about us to recognize that this is a holiday that is meaningful to us. So that was a good example. And as I was saying, in this next slide, I wanted to talk about what are the results of, and this term covering, some of you may have heard it, or even you've heard of it, but it's occurs when an organization recruits a diverse workforce, but consciously or otherwise promotes assimilation rather than inclusion. And there are 4 ways in which this happens in a lot of our organizations, through appearance, affiliation, advocacy, and association. I'm going to go over those with you. The appearance is adjusting their regular attire, grooming, or mannerisms to fit in. So really accommodating that place so that I'm not going to dress the way I normally would. I want to make sure I look like everyone else at work. Affiliation is avoiding behaviors associated with their identity group. So I identify as a Black female, but maybe Black females are looked at as loudmouthed or the angry Black woman. So I'm not going to affiliate myself with that group. And advocacy would be avoiding engaging in advocacy on behalf of their identity group. So, maybe I'm not going to advocate. I'm not going to say something out loud in the workplace that suggests I'm advocating for that group, because, hey, what if the people who are supervising me don't agree, and maybe there'll be some negative consequence. And then association is avoiding association with members of that identity group. So I don't know if you've ever experienced that. I definitely did in college, where oftentimes if there was something that was coming or something important that we all had to be make sure that we wanted to get picked for an internship or something like that, I may not associate with members of my own group because, hey, that's negative, So I just wanted to throw it out to you, Sinette. Have you ever experienced this or know of others who have? any comments you want to give?
Yes, I've definitely experienced all of them. As a Black professional, I've experienced this through, just through hearing how I should, handle myself in the workplace as it relates to my appearance. So, for example, I enjoy doing my hair, I enjoy my grooming, but there is an expectation for my appearance to be a certain way. So I'll be specific, for example, my hair. There is an expectation, or this has been across the board a lot of times in my experience, for my hair to be straightened. I've gone into workplaces before, and if I wear curly, it's more of a natural, fuller state. It's like, oh, that's different than that. And even though people may not say it, those are one of those like microaggression things. It's kind of like, I need you to tone that down, right? And so just the energy behind it oftentimes is the culture, and that's the expectation. So I expect for you to look and present yourself in a certain manner. The affiliation or the association, for example, I've been in situations, and I am guilty of this. Going into workplaces or in school, like professional environments, naturally when I go into a professional environment, it is second nature for me to look and see if there's anybody that looks like me, whether it's a Black man or a Black woman. And that is just my comfort zone in terms of, let me see if there's anybody in here that I can, sit next to and have a little conversation with. And I think that's, to be fair, that's human nature. We want to be in environments where we feel comfortable and that there is some familiarity, and so I have at times removed myself from making friends or ally or setting up myself to be around certain people because I did not want to be associated with the Black people, just the Black people hang together. And to be honest, there's been situations where there's just an unspoken type of thing where I'll see a Black person, they'll see me in the workplace, and it's kind of like, we're going to stay away from each other. And we never have a conversation about it, but it's just a thing where it's like, unless somebody's making the first move, we're going to stay away from that. And that really comes from the association, because I don't want to be perceived as whatever that idea of being the Black people, what they do person, so it is something that has been a continuation of covering, and something that, that has, although it's uncomfortable, you get kind of used to, because that's the method of surviving in a professional world.
Right. Kelly, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I just have one more example with a friend of mine who is from Brazil. He's in a great position. He worked really hard for everything that he has. He's doing really well. And he was mentioning, we were talking the other day, and he was mentioning that sometimes he has to tone down his accent because he feels like if he has an accent or if it's too thick, then people won't maybe take him seriously, or they automatically have these assumptions about him. So he has to really be conscious, and to me, it's just so unfair that he has to even think about that. So hearing these examples and everything, it's really eye-opening to show that these things are happening and they're real.
Yeah. I really appreciate how transparent both of you are when we're talking about these topics. Sometimes it can be very uncomfortable. And I think this is the beginning and what it takes to be able to start uncovering this. And when you hear the stories, like you just said, Kelly, about your friend, that's when you start realizing this is happening. This isn't just something we're making up, or maybe we're just, paranoid, if you will. So, so this last slide is saying, ask yourself this question: is this the America you want? I think, Kelly, you had made a comment at one point about, maybe some people who might be Black or brown may not try for opportunities. Do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think, it's one of those situations where if a Black person is uncomfortable with giving themselves these opportunities or feel like they can't get to them, they may not try. And that's not doing us any justice as Americans, because we want people who are talented and have skills. And and all of these things to bring towards our communities and our world. And it can hinder people just based off the color of their skin. It can hinder them for even trying for these opportunities, which is such a shame, because there's a lot of really deserving people with a lot of great skills that we could be missing out on. So that's kind of where I was going with that.
I see. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Totally. And we want to leave you with this quote as we're really right now, I think, and getting toward our time, but it says, spend time with people of color and get to know them, go to their gatherings and be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So we want to encourage you to do what that quote is saying, you know, and that's a good starting point, I think, because many people are asking, how do we get this going? And that's a good place to go. And one of the things we do as an EAP is, you know, we look for resources and are able to provide a lot of resources to our organizations we have already. And that is also for those organizations that may be lost or struggling on this very topic, and even other topics as well. So we are available to you as an EAP. And so before we get into anything else, I just want to make sure there's nothing else you wanted to add or say, Sanette or Kelly, because the next few things are really resources that we have available.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think we said it all, but I always think that I know that the change starts with the individual. And so I just want to encourage us all to just take our time and look at you and check you. Because once you check yourself, it just opens up so many more possibilities to be able to heal and to work through growth, you know, because I always say we're more alike than we are different. And so I just encourage us all just to, you know, work with ourselves, check ourselves, and it's through that work that we could continue to grow together and as a people, as a nation, overall.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything from you, Kelly?
Yeah, I agree with that, Sanette. I think people might have this notion that, you know, I'm just one person, what can I do? That's not correct. I mean, you could do so much as one person, and it truly can be a contagious thing. You know, if you are educating someone, they might have that opportunity to think about their own privilege or their own selves and start educating themselves, and that can, you know, keep moving forward like a domino effect. So, you know, just, you may be one person, but you can definitely make a difference.
Wonderful.
As that sounds.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So what I have on the screen are just some of the resources we have, and I'm going to go through them, but I want to just remind you that this is recorded, so you can always access them again, you know, if you'd like to, you know, take advantage of some of these resources.
Wonderful. So thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Sanette. We've got a lot of great questions that have come in. It's also been nice as we have seen, as some questions come in, that you seem to answer them within a slide or two as well. So apologies for some of you that pose specific questions if we don't address them right now, because hopefully you found answers in the content that was just delivered. And then, like I said, I know we're not going to be able to get to all of these today, but I have pulled some out. And then we're also going to record all the questions that did come in, so then we can follow up. And like I said, you'll have contact information to be able to reach out to address some of these additional ones. So I'm just going to jump into some of the questions that sort of as they came in, and I'm going to hand them off to you, Stephanie, and then you can sort of determine really either answer yourself or then see who else on the team would make the most sense at this point. So one came up, we talked a lot about diversity and inclusion, but where does equity fit into the conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, well, and anyone can chime in, feel free, ladies. But, you know, I think when we think about the word equity, it's sometimes compared to equality, and there really is a difference. I think that example of, well, I've always seen an image of 3 boxes and people standing on those boxes. It would be equal if each person got the same box in order to see over something. So let's say everybody's not quite tall enough to see over a fence, but you have someone who's 6'2", someone who's 5'8", and someone who's 5'3". and it might be giving both of your boxes to the shortest one so they could stand up and everybody could equally see. So equity, you know, is really providing what we all need to be in the position where we are all have the same opportunity, you know, and I think that that's important as well. I think that's part of what inclusion is. I'm including you because I care, or I'm thinking about all that you bring to the table, and you should have the same opportunity that I have to get the same advancement or to get whatever else is available. I'm hoping that answers it. Does that make sense?
Anyone else want to chime in, or can we move on?
Definitely hit it.
Yeah, that was, I know exactly what image you're talking about too.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Someone else is wondering about racism versus colorism versus white supremacy. So in your opinions, how do they connect, or how are they similar? And also, in what ways are they different? So racism, colorism, and white supremacy.
Colorism. Anybody want to tackle that one?
I'll take the piece from the colorism, and maybe you all can assist me with everything else. But the colorism aspect is something that is across the board, and it across the board meaning it's not something that stems or only exists in African American community. So when we think about colorism, that is, you know, that happens in a lot of different cultures, and so you are judged based off of the color of your skin, opposed to racism. It identifies you as a whole person through your race, and it's still a judgment, a negative judgment. You're defined based upon your color or your race. I think that's where they are similar. In terms of white supremacy, and I don't have anything on that. Can anybody share?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think that's connected to privilege. You know, the notion that the people at all the top level positions, or who have the most power, or who are able to accomplish or do whatever it is that they set their mind to, that they're the supreme being, and that, you know, all the other races or ethnicities or groups, you know, have to acquiesce to or become like them in order to be successful. So it's this notion that they're supreme, and that's word supremacy, being supreme. I'm over all. I wake up in the morning and I feel like the world's my oyster. I don't think about, you know, who's gonna stop me if I go out of my house and walk in the wrong neighborhood, that type of thing. Kelly, anything else you wanted to say? Or
you guys did a great job.
Wonderful. So this one came in, a few different folks in our attendee pool had this at the beginning here. So there was a comment or a bullet on one of the first few slides. It said, there was a statement that said, do not make conversations about race about you. So can we maybe clarify, talk a little bit more about what we mean by that statement?
Okay, so, oh, Kelly?
I was saying, I think
you're gonna say something, go ahead.
Yeah. So that one, I think it's, you know, if you're talking, like say me as a white female talking to, you know, Stephanie or Sanat, it's not me trying to go over my own, you know, well, I do this and I can try and do this, and making it about me versus trying to listen to them. That's kind of what I'm thinking that bullet meant. Do you guys agree with that?
Right, listening and learning, you know, versus just commenting on not only what I do, but also, well, I don't know, I don't get it, I don't see privilege. What do you mean? So then it's about you, your world, what you think, rather than, you know, let me hear from your perspective. You know, so yeah, thanks.
Yeah, not being defensive.
I appreciate a comment just came in. Listening is key. Absolutely. Thank you, Santa. On that note, though, too, about the listening and learning, another question came in. Can we briefly talk about the difference between checking in on your Black loved ones versus potentially, and either intentionally or unintentionally, using your Black loved ones as a teaching opportunity or an experience? So it's a matter of what's the difference from just checking in on them and then using those experiences as a learning opportunity.
I think that could be synonymous. I think that it can go hand in hand. I think in this situation or any situation when you are authentically there to support and gather information, it goes hand in hand. So if I'm checking on you, me checking on you, and I'm saying today is not a good day for whatever reason, eventually it turns into how can I be of assistance, or would you like to share, right? And so to separate the two, I mean, you can, but I think it goes hand in hand with checking in and as well as educating yourself.
Totally agree with that.
Thank you, Sanette. What are some suggestions, or do you have any suggestions for what to do if you're not a direct staff member of your organization? Like, let's say you're an organization hired by a corporation. What are some ways to challenge racism within the corporation without getting yourself or the organization in trouble? So I want to sort of expand on this because this is a great question, almost from like a consultant perspective. I would even say that we can translate this to, let's say a friend works at a company and we become aware, or a spouse or a child or just someone else within our network, that how can we make a difference without getting them, whoever that connection to the organization, in trouble and or the organization in trouble?
Wow, that's a good question. So in what ways do you think that there could be trouble? I guess I want to make sure I'm clear on that question, because I think supporting your person, your staff person, or the person that works for the organization is really important, to support them and to help them to develop a voice. That's what I was thinking, that they should speak up when needed. So if they're recognizing or see some things, approach the people who actually work within that organization to say, use your voice. I will back you. I will encourage you. I will research with you, to maybe find some ways or creative ways of speaking out if you see something. I'm not sure I'm answering it, but I hope so. I think.
No, Stephanie, I think you are, because you're really talking about being an ally is what you're talking about, right? And that also is more than just saying, I understand. It's actually doing something, which actually ties into, that's a great example for another question that was posed. It was talking about the difference between sympathy and empathy, right? And the way that you just described that, being an ally, is really taking that empathetic approach, and there's action associated with it, is what I'm hearing.
Right. Absolutely. Great point, Jonathan. And that's huge. The sympathy versus empathy. Sympathy is, I feel so bad for you. Oh my gosh, I feel guilty that this is happening to you. Oh my God. Whereas empathy is, I want to walk a mile in your shoes. What is this like? Okay, now what can I do? How can I be of service when I'm hearing you say this? Okay, let me think about my perspective and how I can now become somebody who actually puts myself in a position like you are in, and then decide how would I feel, and then what would I want to do as a result. So you're right. It's putting it into action versus just crying with me.
And I think to that point also, it says that also goes into being able to be introspective, right? Because when we don't acknowledge our privilege, our positions, where we stand, we continue to put ourselves and others in a position where it's like, right? So that's something that we have to take, everyone has to take responsibility for, is stepping back and looking at yourself. Am I privileged? Have I lived a privileged lifestyle? How can my privilege assist others? How can that voice that we said, if I know that I'm in a position where I can be of assistance and I'm not using that privilege that I have to be of assistance, I'm not truly being an ally. I'm not truly, using the skill that I have, or the value that I have to be able to help someone else. So I believe that a lot of that comes back to the person and being able to sit with yourself and be honest with yourself so that you can be able to show up for someone else, which that is empathy. That's where it begins, a part of it.
Absolutely. So we're running up on time, but I do want to ask this one other question here, because I know that Stephanie, Kelly, and Sinette, all of you, as a part of your work in supporting our EAP customer organizations and their employees, that you have been running some facilitation or process groups, right? Facilitating groups around everything that's going on. So you may have some very specific examples you can share here. So the question says, or the attendee says, I work at an organization that is primarily white women with just one African-American woman. I've been uncomfortable in our team meetings recently, which have been a place for white women to share and process distress around the systemic violence against people of color, and specifically Black folks. And our Black staff member has to be subjected to all these tiers and external processing. Do you have any recommendations for how to address this?
First question is are you clear that the Black woman have an issue, or is this an assumption? You know, have you had a conversation with her around how she feels about being in that space and how you can support her?
Yeah, and that kind of goes into that, like, being uncomfortable, but necessarily, you know, to ask her, hey, how do you feel about these conversations? Like, I just want to get a sense of where you're at. I think that'd be a good first step.
Mm-hmm. And then, you know, in those moments of de-stressing, you know, as white women and trying to deal and cope with all of this too, is recognizing that she is there and that she's valuable, not that she can answer every question for the Black race, but certainly from her own perspective and her own experiences can provide input, because she's probably stressed too, and can relate to that feeling of feeling stressed out and being concerned or worried about what's going on around as well. So there is a way to make it relatable to her as well.
That's a great reminder and a great way to bring it full circle to really everything that we're talking about today, right? To be able to have those conversations, to take that empathetic approach, to learn more, to be open. So well said. So there's a few questions that we didn't have a chance to get to. As I said, you'll have our contact information. You can reach out. There was a comment that just came in that I would just like to read. It ties into a lot of what we've been talking about today. An anonymous attendee said, I've learned to think of allyship as an action and not as an identity. There are moments where I engage in helpful acts of allyship and moments when I fail to do so, right? And I think by the very nature and the definition of the term, it involves action. But then instead of versus just thinking of ourselves, well, I'm an ally, it's, well, what are the actions that we're taking as allies here? And I also commend the honesty and the candor here. You know, that's the other thing that we're talking about. And this individual said, and sometimes I fail to do so. I think that we all need to remember that. And none of us are perfect. And that also includes having that empathy for others as we're trying to unpack and we're trying to step back and reevaluate and really have a meaningful conversation around a very important topic here. So, and I believe that talking about allyship and one of the resources personally, just my quick share too, I'm sure some of you have read this book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, but it really does a great job for me. I'm on my second read here, and giving real world ideas too about how to have allyship and it being an ally be a verb versus being a noun, if you will. So I want to thank everybody for your time. Stephanie, Kelly, Sinette, thank you very much for sharing your own personal experiences, for being vulnerable, for giving us ideas to think about, and for really putting this all on the table. Because for us to be able to make the progress as a society, as a country, as a world that we need to make, we need to have more and more of these conversations too. And I would also commend everybody that took time out of your day today to be able to participate in this conversation. So stay tuned. Before the week's over, you will receive a link for this entire recording. And we'll also outline some other ways that we've been supporting our organizations and our partners and our friends during these times, both around COVID as well as the topic of today, racism. So with that, I wish everyone a good afternoon and a good week. And thank you again for spending part of your day with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.